Right, morning-ish. Ready
Morning.
when you are.
Okay, grand. So yeah, I guess first question, jumping right into it. As a white supervisor supervising a black trainee and thinking about the research that we've been doing together, did you have any concerns before starting your role as a supervisor?
Um, so I know I came in about was it 7, 8 months into the research. My colleague Laura was supervising up till that point, and I'd kind of come in. And um, I suppose I wanted to. Hopefully, I came in clear about sort of my intention, which is a slightly separate issue. But I came in as somebody that's trying to work on their anti-racism practice, that knows it's an imperfectibility project. I'm never going to be perfect at it. It's something I'm constantly working on and learning from. And that was, one of my reasons for kind of wanting to be involved in this research. Um, kind of thinking about my practice in that area, and just, really learning about how I might reproduce things like kind of white fragility, white saviorism, or other forms of kind of white supremacy, and how I talk and kind of think about my work. And so I was kind of wanting feedback on that. And so that was very much kind of on my mind, about how we can create a space where I can be accountable, get feedback, where the feedback is kind of meaningful. And I hope I tried to do that by kind of bringing my humility along, and my sense of humor at times used in kind of an appropriate way. Um, I think that will be true of any supervision of someone from a different minoritized community to myself. I'm white, but I'm kind of white Jewish. And so I bring that thoughtfulness about how I can uh, um, think about how the relationship's managed. But I think you had another area, because you were researching racism and kind of microaggression. So that was my other bit about really wanting to support you and making sure well-being is kind of on our agenda.
So you mentioned briefly before in one of your answers about like accountability or being held to account. I guess what does that mean for you as a white supervisor supervising a black trainee? And I guess holding in mind the power differentials of the roles, how would what would you be expecting of a black trainee in terms of holding to account?
Um, well, there's a strong invitation and permission to kind of give me feedback.
Mm,
I recognize it will be my responsibility to put anti-racism, racism on the agenda, because of the nature of our workplaces and the way that structural racism operates in all sorts of public and other organizations. So I have a responsibility to that, doubly so because of the nature of the research. So yeah, that's sorry, I've lost your question while I was thinking about that point.
so accountability
Yeah.
and how can that be done, set up? How can that be actioned? But I guess holding in mind the power differentials of the different like the roles, supervisee, supervisor, and also the positionality of race.
Indeed, what white supervisor, supervisee of color,
Mm,
research supervisor, researcher. I think big part of it is kind of trying to name and discuss that power differential is there. We're not going to kind of make it go away. In fact,
mm,
efforts to make it go away can be problematic, because in terms of the sort of accountability I would want, it would be to support me with ensuring the level of support or scaffolding is appropriate, that you're not being under supported or kind of over supported, which I think is a potential risk when, as a white supervisor, or as a supervisor from a dominant group supervising someone from a potentially more marginalized group working on processes of kind of marginalization. So yeah, finding that balance and perhaps naming what it might look like if we went over the kind of balance. And as well as the complexities of kind of research supervision, because I've been an external research supervisor for various projects for years for Surrey. Now I'm part of the course team. Just understanding and learning from my colleague, who's the primary supervisor here, about the nature of the research supervision relationship and how that's distinct from being a clinical tutor, being a clinical supervisor, and certainly kind of from being a therapist.
So it sounds like there's something about defining the roles, but also naming, and that can be quite helpful, naming the power differentials and having a conversation around, okay, people have permission to bring these topics and have these conversations. Just thinking about my experience of being in supervision, I found that permission giving actually the most helpful thing. And yeah, and taking the risk maybe to share what your perspective has been on some of the power differentials or how you view the like your role as a research supervisor, my role as a supervisee. I found that really helpful. To kind of like the supervisor taking the first step.
Mm. And at the same time, I'm quite aware, and while this shouldn't in any way be a requirement, how proactive you were at naming and talking about some things that I think are challenging to talk about. I think quite recently-ish, you talked about internalized racism and how that might impact on your thinking and your kind of research practice. And I think that's an area where white supervisors can find it quite challenging to kind of raise that. That takes, I think, some confidence in having a discussion about difference and racism and how that kind of operates. Obviously, we all have internalized racism, and we can be transparent about it. But I think what I found was that your openness to go there really kind of helped me. I wouldn't want other people to think, oh, then the responsibility is on you, because I've got to be attuned to it, that it might be part of my role to name that, even well, to find a way of naming that and to negotiate how that will be managed. But yeah, I think you were very proactive and open to discussing that, which really helped me actually.
Yeah, and I guess maybe it might be helpful to think about what contributed to that being able to take place, because I think, yeah, I can imagine how on the other side of it, being a research supervisor and not having that lived experience, it might be a little bit difficult or tricky in, okay, how I'm noticing something, how do I address this? Or am I noticing it because I'm viewing this through a white lens? So I think there's there's many layers to that. So yeah, I don't know if you had any ideas around what might have. I'll share what, from my perspective, what contributed to me being able to take that step. I just wondered, from your position as a research supervisor, what do you think contributed to me being able to bring some of that conversation?
Oh, I guess my hope is, and I'm really interested to hear actually. My hope is it's this, because I'm in some ways I'm quite a privileged position, and some members of our research team might not have the support and resourcing that supervisors are getting these days about working in terms of anti-racist practice. There's funded training. It's become a very influential conversation in the profession, really late. Some of us have been waiting for years for these conversations to commence within psychology. They've been happening in other professionals, in other roles that I've had for years. So my hope is that it was kind of that, but fundamentally, it's a relational activity that we're kind of in. So I would hope in any relationship, I'm working hard to mentalize the other, and to work on limiting how that power difference can silence us.
Mm. You used the word mentalizing, and I think for me, that's quite a core part of what made me feel comfortable to really go there and have those conversations and name some of the internalized thoughts and stuff that I was having, because I felt like you were able to mentalize me not only as a trainee, but mentalize me as a black trainee and think a little bit about what some of my experiences as a black trainee might be within the cohort, out in like on clinical placements, and even within the research supervisory relationship. I felt like you were thinking about what is this going to be like for Ishmael as a black trainee. And I think that consideration and that thought then made me feel safe enough to take the risk to share some of the what we were saying as internalized racism, but also hearing about how you speak about racism and institutional racism, structural racism. I think you using that language helped me feel safe also in that if I have internalized racism, the problem isn't going to be positioned with me necessarily. So again, I think there's like lots of things that you did to, yeah, make it safe enough for me to then take the risk to share some of yeah, my inner thoughts in a very transparent and authentic way. Whereas in other spaces, I might be a little bit more guarded or a little bit more cautious in how much I share, because there'll be a question mark around how will it be interpreted, will there be any consequences, will it be taken the wrong way, etc.
Yeah. And I think, you do take risks. I think some way, being involved, being involved in this kind of research, I see this as kind of justice work. And justice work really
Mm,
puts you at risk, and you really need kind of resourcing through it. I was at a really interesting conference at the weekend where a lot of people were speaking to how we protect and look after ourselves while taking this kind of work forward. And your generosity of feedback is really helpful and helping me guide me think about, well, what can I learn from this supervision for supervisions, but also how can we sustain this as we get into some what I imagine is going to be really tough data analysis. And again, for me, the question is, am I keeping an eye on if I'm under supporting or kind of over supporting? Because I think it can really go both ways. First of all, for example, I might, even though Laura's the methodology specialist, it may be that I might feel like, oh, I want to kind of hold back on sort of supporting you with excellence in your research or trying to refine and develop it because my white fragility might stop me questioning what you might say about racism as if you would have the whole truth. And there's all sorts of stereotypes in that, like you'll have all knowledge and all responsibility for it. And so I think it's being able to kind of raise questions as well. And I'm hoping that the relationship creates a context where that can be more possible.
yeah, I mean, I think I guess it's touching on, I guess, the ethics of you have a role as a research supervisor and the research that we're developing, it needs to be of a certain standard, which will require some guidance or checking in or, um, yeah, guiding towards something, maybe. And I think, yeah, from your perspective, the things that you've mentioned, like some of the white fragility that might get in the way of that process, um, but also maybe on my side, some of the, I don't know, being sensitive to or being more hooked into the data and the narratives that are being told and it being quite triggering because I would have had some of those experiences myself and how that then gets managed, spoken about, thought about. I think is maybe an extra layer that is going to need to be thought about and managed in our research supervision that might not need to always be managed in other research supervision spaces.
I think that's come up in some of the anti-racist supervision training
Mm,
that I've had about, you know, it's a daily experience. If somebody brings racism to supervision, it's not some special kind of, this is woven into the sort of oppressive fabric of some of the hostile environments we live in,
mm.
and how we acknowledge that knowledge, but at the same time not minimize the potential effects that it's bringing to, kind of you as a person and you as a researcher.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about me speaking about racism or microaggressions in the research. I'm having those lived experiences more than likely daily. Um, and yeah, another Black trainee might really want to have those types of conversations in the research supervision. Another Black trainee might be like, actually, I don't wish to speak about my own lived experiences in that much detail. Um, so I think, yeah, it needs to be judged on an individual basis, I think. But for myself, I found it helpful that at least it's being thought about. Again, that consideration, because it gives me a bit of an insight into where the awareness levels are on the actual lived experience of what Black trainee might be going through. And that, yeah, has created a lot. It's gone a long way for me in creating that sense of safety.
I mean, I'm also aware we meet in other contexts. So there was some work going on about men in psychology, and I know we
Mm,
had some discussions there that got into what's the most salient identity when you're kind of training. So, it feels like that's kind of opened up, and we've shared quite a bit about that. And,